Hey, what's up, guys? So, my name is Alfred, and I'm going to do a book review on The People in the Trees. So, I don't know, from my perspective, this is being read backwards, but I'm not very smart, so I'm not sure how you're going to see it as. But it's called The People in the Trees by Hanya Yan. I'm not going to say her last name because I don't want to disrespect her. But it's such a good book that I was like, when I'm finished, I'm going to make a review about this. So her other famous book is called A Little Life, but to the other Libraphiles that I know, they have read all her books and they say that this is her favorite one. And I haven't read her other books, but this was. I told my niece the other day, I was like, this is probably my favorite fiction book that I've ever read, and I'm like old. So yes, so I'm gonna go over a few themes, key themes that I like about it, and at the very end, I'm gonna go into the astrology of it. And if you're not into that, then no worries, just press stop. But that's why I'm saving that towards the end. So what is it about? Okay, so the book is about um, a 24-year-old medical student who goes to he's got like this project that he's basically being an apprentice for this anthropology, something like that. um they're going to this very remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's so remote. It's called Micronesia, but I'm not gonna act like I'm smart. I never heard of that word till I read this book. But basically, it takes place. They're from California, but they go um, to Hawaii, and then from there they go to Tahiti, and then from there they go to this island called Ivu Ivu, and he's basically there to follow along to this senior scientist. And they don't really know why. They kind of like officially on paper, it's like they're gonna just study this very remote people. It's a very very tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, like I said, and they're just gonna study them. Just for shits and giggles. But when they get there, he realizes that his boss is actually somewhat of an eccentric, and that there's this legend that these people are actually so much older than they appear. So when I say so much older, I mean like they'll look like they're 60 years old, but really they're like 200 years old. They could be 300 years old. And so that's the real reason why they're there. Of course, the main character doesn't realize this until he gets there. He just thinks he's going on serving this apprenticeship. He got in kind of a bit of a trouble in school, so he needs some time away from his environment. So he goes on this trip, and I'm gonna actually read an excerpt from it. So he's talking about this one woman they found, and they named her Eve. Obviously, they don't speak English. There's no, so they named her Eve, right? So it goes like this. Last and least, then there was Eve, who was her own special problem. So they noticed that she was very old, but they're not sure how old she was. They're trying to contemplate how old she could be. Even in the company of the dreamers, she remained singular. There was so much she could not do. She could not speak, she could not listen, she could not interact with the others. She was without shame or manners or niceties or logic. Even often when I regarded her from a distance, I felt as if I were watching something inanimate that had been unlawfully given breath. She staggered about and yelped when she felt like it, and crammed things into her mouth and scrutinized the inconsequential and ignored the fascinating. When her coloring and lumpy shape, she occasionally resembled nothing so much as a sweet potato. One sat upon two legs and plopped amid us. It was not a life, but that she breathed and sighed and ate. And then suddenly I realized this was what being a Mo'okua'o must be. This was what they were afraid of. This was the end of the story. I flipped back into my notebook looking for Talon's definition of mo'okoa'o, which I had written down after our conversation all those months ago. All normal in appearance, but all incapable of making meaningful conversation. All they could do was jitter, babble, and laugh at nothing. The neighing laughter of the brainless, and knew Eve was fully transformed, was a fully transformed Moakoa'o. She was what the others would become. All it took, it occurred to me, was time. Um, I flew back toward our camp. Lawa Eke's father, I screamed as I ran. All we had to do now was ask Lawa Eke's father to identify Ika'ana and Vi'u, who would surely have been alive and had been present in the village at the same time. Well, we would also ask him to identify Eve. If he couldn't, it would confirm what I suspected, that Eve was so old that Ika'ana and Vi'u knew her from the village. That would make her well over 200 years old. So they're actually starting to really understand that this might not be legend. This actually might be true. This might be a very, very hidden secret. So it's really good. And if you can tell by the way I read it, not the way I read it, but just like by what I read, that the author is just so descript, and she's very sensual, actually. The way she describes the island, there's like a couple pages where she literally just talks about the color green and how there's so much green on the island, and that they didn't know that there were so many different shades of green. This takes place in the 40s, before color television. When things of color, if you wanted to see vibrant color, you would have to go in nature or go to an art museum. You know what I mean? So I feel like it is possible that a lot less people then kind of knew the grand, unless you were an artist, right? Knew the grand spectrum of color. And so the fact that she's so descript, and just everything that's the whole environment, it really, really makes you feel like you're there. And when you're in such an exotic place, you really have to go into it, on how to describe the lushness of a jungle in the middle of the Pacific, right? um why let's see, that's why I loved it. What grabbed my attention? So what grabbed my attention, first of all, was the book starts on how he um his childhood, and he's the opposite of me. Okay, so I'm very emotional, I'm very spiritual, I'm very intuitive. I like to go based off my feelings, but based off my emotions. I'm a sucker for a sob story. I cry for, if it's a crying movie. I mean, that's me. But this guy is a scientist, and not to say that scientists are psychopaths, but they're just so cerebral. They're so logical. They're so mathematical. They're so, they quantize everything. They measure everything. They want to, everything has to make sense for them. So he's talking about the death of someone in his family, and instead of saying, I really miss her, I loved her a lot, and she was really kind, and I miss her soul, I miss her, sometimes I can feel her with me. So he's nothing like that, because he's kind of ignorant when it comes to connecting with his own emotions. He and because of fear, right? He finds it easier to just be like, well, she was kind of stupid, and I don't know, I'm not sure how much of a contribution she made to this earth. I'm not sure if she really even deserves to be missed, stuff like that. So just everything, and the fact that he's a scientist, he's talking about, this is the 1940s, before PETA came in and was like, hey, y'all can't treat animals this way. I don't care if they're test subjects, you cannot treat animals this way. So there's a lot of that going on how the animals are treated in the science lab and stuff like that. So it was, and me, I love animals. Like I want to own an animal sanctuary one day. So for me to hear about what's going on with all these animals in the science lab, I'm just like, what? It was really offensive. His morals are clearly very opposite of mine. So that's why it at the same time, it was a page turner, because even though it was very offensive, it's like, it's not something that I'm used to. So this is why I wanted to know about it some more. But the more I read it, the more I was like offended by him and by his morals. And I even know someone who was like, I had to put the book down a couple times because he was just such a shithead. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So the themes that I see is one of the themes is fantasy. I mean, it's going into people want to be explorers, but you can Google Earth almost any place on the Earth right now. So it's like but this is taking place in a time where there are many places that are unexplored. So there's a lot of fantasy in this book. There's a lot of places where your imagination can run wild. That's what I like about it. The other thing is sex. He talks about he actually is not having like any sex in this book, but he's talking about the natives and how they're very unashamed and they're unabashed and they have a real innocence when it comes to their view on sex. It's just nature. And they're right. That is, it's our society that kind of like puts a taboo on sex and stuff like that. So that's another thing. The other thing, unfortunately, another thing was abuse, and that includes sexual abuse. I'm not going to go into that because I just want to I feel like you have to read it to really understand. But there is a bit of sexual abuse in the book, and it's not glorifying it in any way, but it does skid on the surface of what the book. And it's very interesting. And the last theme that really hits home with me is geriatric illness. So when I was reading about about Eve, this lady that they found in the jungle who they think is really, really old. They found that even though she might be very old, her brain was not catching up with her body. So she probably had a type of dementia. And actually, right now, my mom has severe dementia. And the way they describe this woman actually is the way they described my mom. My mom is almost nonverbal. She just laughs at random things. She'll just kind of, my mom is she lives in a nursing home, and so it's very, very. And me being a very emotional person, I mean, I cry all the time. Every time I see her, I cry, and then I start to talk with her and stuff like that, and then I go home and then I cry, and so it's just I just love my mom so much, and just it's crazy that I picked up this book right in the middle of this whole chapter in my life where I'm dealing with my aging parents. My dad is retired in Colombia, but my mom is, she has severe dementia. She's, incontinent. She is, she has just had a lot of problems. It's just like heartbreaking for me to see as her son, as she's my favorite parent, and it's just really, really hard. So it's just so interesting to read this book, about people who don't age, but physically, but mentally they are aging. So that really hit home for me. And I'm going to read just one more quick little thing about that. He says, well, what more is there for me to say on this matter? We all know what happens next. There were endings, but none of them were happy. And that's exactly how I feel about my mom. It's like, of course it's going to end, but it's not going to end. None of them were happy endings. We all know how it ends with geriatric illness. Whenever I am asked, I cannot help but brisk when relating to what followed, for it is too difficult for me to make the story into what it ought to be, a saga in itself, a long death that spirals down slowly to the ground. And I totally felt that because my mom, I started taking care of her 4 years ago and actually just put her in a home now. I spent the last 4 or 5 years taking care of my mom, and she went from being able to drive and being able to write and being able to read, cook, clean, whatever, all the way down to me changing her diapers and me being her power of attorney and me making all her financial decisions and me, cleaning her, bathing her, feeding her. And, so it was like, it's exactly what he said, a long spiral death down to the ground. And before I read that, I was saying like, man, watching my mom, it's like kind of I call it the world's slowest car crash because it's an inevitable death. It's just when is it going to happen? You know what I mean? So that really, really, really hit home for me. Um, Pursued connection to oh yeah, I already wrote that. Rating, I give it an 8 out of 10. 10 out of 10 meaning there's nothing they could have added or done to make it to make it a better book. So I don't know if 10 out of 10 is even possible. 0 out of 10 meaning it was just nothing they could have done to make it better. Um, I mean, it was like the worst it could be, you know. So I give it an 8 out of 10, which for me is very, very good. I think it was such an amazing book. And the other thing about this book is that she was so good. Okay, so it's about a scientist, right? And you know, real scientists are surrounded by other scientists. There's a whole scientific community, and they are talked about and by other scientists. There's a bunch of papers. There's biographies. There's different people who write biographies about the same person. So this is about someone who became a very successful scientist. What was interesting is that there's so many footnotes, right? This whole book is in the perspective of someone who was a colleague of his who edited his testimony, and so there's so many footnotes by this colleague of his, and so it's done so well. It's done so well that for the first like 50, 60 pages, I was like, is this a real guy or not? I was like, is this like a fictional account of something that actually happened? Like I could not. It was so well done. I had to research like if this was fiction or not. I really really was like, is this a real person? Because she did the Hanya, the author, did such a good job. Just it it's interesting how fantastical it is. Is that a word? Fantastical, fantastical and sensual it is, and how exotic and how and erotic as well. But at the same time, it's also so cut and dry. It's also so, you know, intellectual that you have to wonder, is like, is this a real person? That's what really caught my attention as well. Was that I've never read a piece of fiction. Usually, when you read fiction, it's clearly fiction. You know from the beginning that it's fiction. This book, how the fuck do you read fiction and then 60 pages into the book, you're like, is this real? You know? So, yeah, I give it an 8 out of 10. It was a perfect book. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm going to read her next book, A Little Life. I can't wait to read it. Yeah, so that's the end of the review. So now I'm going to go into the astrology of it, and I doubt any of you are going to be interested in that, but if you are, then go ahead and stick around with it. So I do Vedic astrology. That's sidereal astrology. That's an ancient Vedic Hindu astrological system. So my astrology that I study and contemplate is a bit different. So the themes here is one theme I definitely got was Leo, the constellation of Leo, specifically the star of Purva Falguni that sits on the butt of the lion, and that's a very 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 sexual placement for anyone. So like Beyonce's sun is in Purva Falguni, and Madonna's moon is in Purva Falguni. You know, so people who are blessed, people who are touched or influenced by Purva Falguni, they're very artistic, but they're also very sexual too, right? So that's why you get all these very sexual people, you know. And so, and because it's a star ruled by Venus, you get a lot of romance, a lot of artistic or artistry. So yeah, was romantic scenery, just being in an exotic place in the middle of nowhere, and just the amazing descriptions of just the fantasy and how you're naked and you don't have to be ashamed of it, and you're having sex, and you know there's no shame in it. It's just a part of life, and it's something to be enjoyed, and it's very nonchalant, you know. um, you know, and here in today's society, you know, we call it group sex or orgies and stuff like that, and we call it that because there's a taboo to that. But in the book, they're just they're just being them. There's nothing taboo about it, you know. So I think that was really interesting. It's just such a creative book, you know, and I think that's very very Leo, especially Purva Falguni. Leo is the karaka of creativity. That's why it's also the karaka of children, because children are the ultimate creations, right? Um, and so not to get taboo, but Purva Falguni, this also will emphasize sex, enjoying sex with younger people. So especially men, when men have Purva Falguni in their chart, they'll be 40, 50, 60 years old, and they'll still only go after like college girls, girls in their 20s, stuff like that. Because this even says in ancient Hindu texts that people that have this placement um, will enjoy sex with younger people. And like I said, there was there were thematic elements of that, which I'm not going to go into because I don't want to talk too much about the book. You're just going to have to read it. But the other thing is, there's a lot of children in the book. So eventually, in the end of the book, this scientist, he adopts a lot of children. He winds up having like 20 kids, and Leo Leo rules the fifth house, and the fifth house is children. So for all those reasons, definitely I got a Leo vibe. The other vibe I got was a Virgo vibe. It's specifically the star of Chitra. So people who are ruled by Chitra, they're so smart. They're so smart. They can go to college. They can get higher degrees. That's just what they do. They are very successful academically, and because of that, they can have very very harsh morals. So a lot of times when in politics, you'll see people who are very 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 controversial in their thoughts and in their beliefs, but you can tell they're very smart. That energy is Chitra. People who aren't afraid to push buttons, and people who aren't afraid. But I put this nerdy, rude people with glasses. There are so many nerdy. I know so many nerdy, rude people with glasses that I'm like, you're Chitra, because that's what they do. They're very smart. They're very intelligent. They're very intellectual. They have great intellectual capacity, but because they kind of lack that tenderness, because they're so cerebral, they often come across as rude. Um, yeah, so that's the other thing. And then that star of Chitra, which is in the constellation of Virgo, is a nakshatra ruled by Mars. And actually, I did a study on Mars, and Mars is a really good for the hospital and for doctors and stuff like that. Specifically, like surgeons, but just medical field in general, because one, actually Mars is the karaka for the sixth house of Virgo. So like I said, Virgo is here all the time, and actually the main character was a medical he went to Harvard Medical School, so was um, he was himself a doctor. Sixth house is also, Virgo rules the sixth house, and sixth house is also hospitals, schools, it's science, it's analytics. So this is all Virgo. And like I said, he was a scientist. He went there to take 1,000 notes. Him and his team were all scientists and anthropologists, and they all come from the sciences. And all they did was analyze, take notes, do tests, look into the nitty gritty of things. Sixth house Virgo is all about doing the hard stuff that people don't want to do. It's not romantic. It's not fantasy. It's quantizing. So that's what sixth house Virgo is, and that's why so many people who are really strong Virgo, they're very very good at the sciences, because they're very good at studying. They're very good at taking notes. They're very good at being analytical. So yes, and in ancient history, Hathor, Chitra, that star, is a very, very, very ancient star that has been revered for thousands of years, like thousands of years. So today we call it Chitra. Well, actually we don't. Ancient Hindus call it Chitra, but even that's Chitra has even been worshipped and revered even before that. And so it's actually tied to the goddess Hathor, who herself was a consort to the gods, and was a very doting mother. Basically what it means is someone who can be blessed with Chitra is a very sinful person. And they even say in ancient Hindu texts that this is someone who indulges in sinning. So this is a very sinful person who is also a very good mother. So who's also a Chitra native is Kim Kardashian, and Anna Nicole Smith, and Amber Rose, and who else did I say? Oh, Madonna has her Rahu in Kim Kardashian. I mean, her Rahu in Chitra. So all these Chitra natives have something in common. All of them were very sinful women, especially sexually, right? We're not afraid of being looked at, being admired, being naked in front of people. That's a very Mars thing as well, because Chitra is ruled by Mars. Um, but also, they were all really, really doting mothers. Kim Kardashian is a very doting mom. So is Amber Rose. You know, Anna Nicole Smith had a very close relationship with her kids, specifically her son. You know, Madonna has like 6 kids, 7 kids. You know, so and then Madonna is like the queen of being nasty. You know, so that's a very in this book the main character is kind of seen as a villain, and a lot of people really don't like him at all. And I'm not going to say exactly why they don't like him, but he's not likable at all. But at the same time, he has 20 kids. He's a very doting father, and when he was on the island, a lot of the kids gravitated towards him, and his boss even said, "You're really good with kids. You're going to be a good father one day." And he did. He wound up adopting a lot of kids and was a very doting father. So on one side, you saw the evil in him, but on the other side, you saw the fatherly figure in him. So he was kind of also expressing that Hawthorne vibe, which is someone who's a sinner, but then someone who's also a devoted parent. And so the last theme that I saw was Jupiter. Jupiter definitely was here. Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. So think about that, Pisces and Sagittarius. Pisces rules far away, isolated places. And then this book takes place on a very far away, isolated island. Um, um, Pisces, and the other sign is Sagittarius, right? So Sagittarius rules higher education, and he is a Harvard Medical School graduate, so that's definitely higher education. And throughout the book, because he goes to Harvard, and because he's a scientist, and because he's such a competitor, they do talk about Oxford and Stanford and Harvard, and they mention all those higher educational schools all throughout the book. So it's definitely higher education mentioned, and even towards the end, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize, which is again, higher status. So I think that's very interesting. So Jupiter is definitely there, expressed through Pisces, being far away, isolated places, and through its other ruled sign, Sagittarius, ruling over higher education. What was also interesting is I've actually dissected and analyzed the book. What's that book? Lord of the Flies, and that actually was very Jupiter as well, because remember, so like I said, Jupiter Pisces represents far away, isolated places, and they also were they survived a plane crash and landed near a isolated island. And also, like I just said, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is higher education. And these boys that in Lord of the Flies, they were private. They went to a private school, so that's higher education. So that's actually the second book that I've read about Jupiter expressing itself through some type of higher learned people that are stuck on some tiny little island far away. So that's another Jupiter. So I definitely saw Jupiter being expressed in this book. Okay, guys, that's enough. That's almost 30 minutes long. And yes, I love the book. I thought it was great. I don't think I'll be reading it again because probably not for years later. When I feel like I'm taking a vacation, I'll read it again or something like that. But in the meantime, I'm just gonna I'm reading my current book, which is really good. But I'm gonna also read her other book, which is A Little Life. All right, guys. Bye.